Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt. I promised you all morning that I would begin a 10-part series in the week before an election with a sitting United States Senator who's not up for election. And the reason is because this book, Only the Strong, is probably the most important national security book put out by a sitting elected official since I have been doing this show. And Senator Tom Cotton joins me. He's the author of Only the Strong. Good morning, Senator. Thank you for this. Congratulations on the launch of a book. People have asked me why I am doing 10 parts on one book in the week before an election, and it is my obvious attempt to put national security on the table. Is that why you released Only the Strong during an election week?
Well, thanks, Hugh, for having me on and talking about Only the Strong. Yeah, I did want to release my new book, Only the Strong, before the election, in part to outline the stakes of the election. As I describe in the book, many Americans feel like America has been in decline under Joe Biden and before him, Barack Obama. And I tell the inside story about why this isn't an accident, why it's not just Joe Biden's bad luck. This is decline by design, that Democrats going back 100 years have been undermining the sources of American power, not only our military, but also energy production, our southern border, and the sovereignty of our nation. They've been coddling our adversaries like China and Russia. And they're doing these things on purpose, as I explain in Only the Strong. And the stakes of this election is if you think America's been in decline, if you want to reverse it, if you want to restore American power, I have a roadmap here that we can once we take back the Congress in this election and hopefully the White House in the next election.
Now, Senator, you've got two small children. You're married up. You've got two small children. I have 5 grandchildren. We are sleepwalking towards a catastrophe. And I say that having lived through the Carter years and watching that catastrophic sequence of events beginning with the Iranian Revolution. But I've also been listening to Churchill's The World Crisis, and Great Britain sleepwalked into World War I, ignoring what was going on in the world. That was not driven by an ideological blindness, but by arrogance. We're being driven by ideology. That's the catastrophic moment we're in. We are trapped by an ideology of the left into ignoring what is going on in the world. Do you think we can break out of this in time?
I do think we can, Hugh, because the American people are not really ideological. Even those kind of center-left Americans who normally vote Democratic are not ideologues in the way that Barack Obama was an ideologue and that his understudy Joe Biden has followed in his footsteps. Or ideologues going back to Woodrow Wilson, as I explain in Only the Strong, really the fountainhead of American leftist thinking, especially in the Democratic Party. And in particular, when it comes to our safety in the world, the American people are the opposite of ideologues. They are usually clear-eyed, hard-nosed about America's interests, and they want leaders to do the same, to put them and their interests first.
Now, I've talked to you frequently about what happens if the Senate majority and the House majority become Republican and whether or not we can buttress America's defenses in time against Xi and other enemies, including Iran and many other internal enemies having to do with terrorism and things like that. But first, we got to win. So I want to do politics, then go through every chapter and Only the Strong. We can't do the whole book, but I can give people a taste. How do you feel about the election on 11/8?
We're going to win next week, Hugh. I don't have any question in my mind. We're going to take back the House. I think we're going to take back the Senate as well. I think we may even win in some surprising races. And the Democrats are currently right now trying to shore up even places like Washington State, where Chuck Schumer is spending millions of dollars at the last minute to prop up Patty Murray, a 30-year failed career politician, against Tiffany Smiley, herself a great American patriot who stood by her husband, Scotty Smiley, when he was wounded in Iraq and stood up for our troops and our veterans, demanding better care for them. We've got great candidates like Tiffany all across the country. That's why we're going to win a majority. We can't turn everything around as long as Joe Biden is president, but we can begin to stop the decline. As I explained in Only the Strong, we can do things like begin to rebuild our military, begin to restore America's energy dominance, attend to our wide-open southern border. It'll take a new president to fully reverse it, but we can start it next week with a big smashing victory.
Now, every single time I bring you on, people know I've known you for a long time, and most people who listen to the show know your story. But I want people to understand you grew up in Arkansas, you went to Harvard undergraduate, you went to Harvard Law School, 9/11 happened. You paid off your student loans by working. Off into the Army you went, but you didn't want to be a JAG. You insisted on becoming a fighting soldier. You went to Ranger School. You became a member of the 101st, combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, a tour in the Old Guard. have led a serious life. You've written a serious book. You're a serious person with a very wry sense of humor. But what do warriors see and hear differently when they're actually deployed from what people like me who sit in studios and pontificate hear and see? And I'm speaking specifically about when you were in Iraq and listening to President Obama.
Well, Hugh, in my experience in both Iraq and Afghanistan, obviously the aperture of one's vision is somewhat narrowed to the battle right in front of you because, as you say, the stakes are deadly serious. However, it's also more focused on those stakes as well. So while you might not view all the news, every up and down in the business world or local news when you're in a place like Iraq or Afghanistan, you do pay attention to what your commander-in-chief is saying or what the Secretary of Defense is saying. That goes from things like whether soldiers' pay is going to be increased, what's happening on the home front, back home at bases, and the matters of grand strategy. You know, we all knew in Iraq in 2006 that we were not winning the war, that we didn't have enough troops. And most of the troops with whom I served were hopeful that George Bush would do what he did a few months after we left, which is provide more troops with a new strategy to help us stabilize that country. Likewise, that was in Afghanistan for the first few months of the Obama presidency. And I have to say, after Obama sounded unusually strident and bellicose terms about Afghanistan and the war, it was immediately noticed by all the troops, down to frontline soldiers, that when he took office, he did not have a plan in place to immediately act upon it. So much so that we began to hear from Afghans out on our patrols or in the local market, the old Afghan proverb that you have the watches, but we have the time. Everyone could tell that Obama, despite his unusually bellicose campaign rhetoric, was beginning to look for ways to kind of back out of Afghanistan and head for the exits in those early months of 2009. And then, of course, when he took his apology tour just weeks before we left country, we were shocked by the president traveling around the world, apologizing for America, suggesting that we had to atone for supposed sins.
Now, in a unique way, as a graduate of President Obama is a Harvard Law graduate, as you are, you're carrying a rifle in a war zone. President Obama is off on the apology tour. How did that feel? Because you know that that's an ideologue. That's not a commander-in-chief. That's an ideologue spouting Ben Rhodes' written nonsense. The Metternich of MSNBC is out there feeding him lines which just doesn't match up with your reality walking point.
Yeah, well, as I say in Only the Strong, Barack Obama was the most ideological president since Woodrow Wilson. He's an example of what Gene Kirkpatrick famously said about the Democrats, the Blame America First Democrat, and we took that tour in the winter and spring of 2009. He continued to apologize for what he viewed as America's sins. Remember, it was on the apology tour when he denigrated American exceptionalism, which most Americans hold dear, saying it was no different from Greeks thinking Greece is exceptional or the British thinking Great Britain is exceptional, which is really Obama's way of saying that it's just kind of an outdated and obsolete chauvinism for one's own, that we should really all transcend our petty patriotism and become what Obama declared himself in the 2008 campaign, a citizen of the world. So it makes a certain sense that he would go on that kind of apology tour because he is deeply hostile to American power and America's unique leadership role in the world. In fact, he said, as I explained in Only the Strong, that no world order should elevate one nation above the other. Most Americans, again, are not ideological, and they believe that it's been a very good thing to have a United States-led order that does indeed elevate the United States above all other nations. That's why we used to take pride in the term leader of the free world for the American president.
A long conversation about Only the Strong. I sat down last week with Senator Cotton and did something I haven't done in 23 years of a radio show. Taped 10 segments on one book. Why? Because national security matters more than anything else. It's hard to get people to pay attention, especially in a week before an election, but we've got to. And I want to pay attention to a concert in Meidalam. I'll remember a lot about Only the Strong, but that's a great anecdote. And what I was touched by is your remark that these are the greatest patriots we have, the men and women who go abroad that don't get much in the way of entertainment. I thought of Gary Sinise and John Andrazik and the great men and women who go and show up for a day or 2 days and provide a little. These people are everywhere around the country, the world, and we forget about them, Senator. And you wanted to make sure in Only the Strong that we don't forget that at this moment, under the sea, in the skies around the world, American patriots are serving in uniform.
Yeah, Hugh, I started Only the Strong with a short story about my time in Afghanistan. We were out in a very small patrol base in Medarlam in Loghman Province in eastern Afghanistan. Typically, when you have USO tours, they stick to the big bases that are easier to secure, places like Bagram and Kandahar. But we had a band from Illinois called the Matt Toss Band come in and join us in May of 2009. It was pretty hot when they were playing out on our outdoor basketball court. But you could tell the troops, even though necessarily their music taste didn't run to that style, they really appreciated the musicians who came out to honor our troops, just like we appreciate people like Gary Sinise and John Andrazik. When we have almost 200,000 of our fellow Americans spread all around the world manning the distant ramparts to keep the ravages of war away from our shores, we should always remember them, hold them fast, keep them in our prayers, and most importantly, provide them with the support and the resources and the weapons and the training they need to defend ourselves, to defend our nation and keep themselves safe.
It is a terrific way to begin the book, and then it's like a rocket to the right jaw when you say, quote, in Barack Obama's second term, when this occurred, American power crumbled. And it did. And it did for reasons that are lasting and to our detriment. Does anyone honestly assess how bad President Obama, until Only the Strong, how bad? Maybe Robert Gates, but anyone honestly stepped up and said how bad he was for the country?
Bob Gates is pretty tough in his memoir about it, but remember that memoir is written in 2013, published in 2014. You really have to look back on Obama's tenure to see how ruinous it was for our nation. But I have to tell you, Hugh, I don't think you would get that assessment from Barack Obama or John Kerry or any of the aides in his White House who helped design his foreign policy. In fact, I think he would, like an American Ozymandias, tell Americans to look upon his works in despair. One point I make in Only the Strong is Barack Obama's failures are not incompetence. They're not naivete. They're not inexperience. They are exactly what he intended. He came into office as the most ideological president since Woodrow Wilson. He wanted to lay American power low. And at every turn, he was ruthless about doing that. Just recently, for
instance. And effective.
Yeah.
And effective.
Yeah, very effective in pursuing this ideological agenda. You know, recently, because of the protests in Iran, he reflected on his failure to step forth and support the Green Revolution protest movement in the summer of 2009. He said that he regretted that. Hugh, I don't believe it for a moment. As I explained in Only the Strong, he had a very careful, thoroughly worked out plot to achieve a nuclear deal with Iran that was about much more than just their nuclear program. It was about atoning what he viewed as our sins against Iran, going back to the 1950s when he falsely, wrongly believed that we somehow overthrew a democratically elected government. And the reason he stood by in 2009, when you had the largest uprising in Iran since the revolution itself in 1979, again, he wasn't caught flat-footed, he wasn't naive, he wasn't inexperienced, he wasn't new to the job, he was ruthless in pursuing his rapprochement with the Ayatollahs, and he was under...
You know, I was late to this recognition. I was one of the people who thought he was just an incompetent person who had Peter Principled up to the presidency by mistake. You have persuaded me, quote, and I'm quoting from Tom Cotton's new book, The Senator's Written Only the Strong, America's recent decline isn't an accident, it's decline by design. And I want to very quickly say, Senator Cotton is not accusing anyone of treason. He's not accusing anyone of trying to destroy America from within. There's no fifth column. It's an ideological view of the world that views American power as bad for the world. And Senator, I want to just give you 2 minutes before we move on to the next slide. Explain to people this ideological view. They don't hate America. They hate American power. They're very different things.
Well, Hugh, as I write in Only the Strong, they don't necessarily hate America. They aren't necessarily un-American, though a lot of them are, frankly. One thing, though, that is true of the Democratic Party almost uniformly going back to the 60s and the 70s is that they are at best, ambivalent about America.
Yes.
And certainly hostile to American power. And they think not only the world, but America itself would be a better place if we would atone for our sins, if we would pull in our horns, if we would become something more like a normal nation, as opposed to the exceptional nation that most Americans grew up believing in, and still want America to be, not only for the world, but first and foremost for ourselves, for our own safety, for our own freedom, for our own prosperity. And that is just alien to the way Democrats think. I mean, I defy you to name a single Democrat over the last 50 years who has been unabashedly, unashamedly proud of America in the way that Ronald Reagan was in his rhetoric about our country and our history and our future.
Anyone who takes up that challenge will not be able to meet it. Tomorrow we will continue with our conversation with Senator Cotton about his brand new book, Only the Strong, as we get into the heart of it and the ideological soul of the left when it comes to American power. Go to Amazon.com right now. Get Only the Strong. Buy a bunch of copies. Give them to your friends. Get smart. National security matters. It especially matters next Tuesday. Thank you, Senator. We'll talk to you tomorrow.